Recognizing that Sarawak is a land rich in resources and yet 57% of households are low income, and noting that Sarawak is the third largest contributor to the country's GDP, and yet the people of Sarawak are still among the poorest with the third highest portion of people living below poverty, and acknowledging that the quality of education and gainful employment opportunities, decent housing and infrastructures, and internet connections are still seriously lacking or lagging behind, and recognizing that Sarawak is an autonomous partner in Malaysia, and yet our rights under MA63 and freedom have and continue to erode to intolerable levels since 1963. These and other failures arising from nearly 50 years of GPS XBN in government, it is time for all Sarawakians to stand united behind PSB to become the government in the coming PRN12 for our children, our Fairland Sarawak, and our future. Our manifesto and our commitments. 1. Freedom of religion. We will assert and declare that Sarawak is a secular state and has no official religion. In this regard, we will ensure a complete freedom of religion. 2. Equal partners in Malaysia under MA63. We will advocate for the federal government to amend Article 1(2) of the Federal Constitution to revert the wordings to the original wordings and restore our status as equal partners with Malaya as intended by our founding fathers. 3. Regain our sea territorial rights. We will reject the application and enforcement of the Territorial Sea Act 2012 so that we can maintain full control of the use and development of all resources belonging to Sarawak, including the full licensing rights to oil and gas exploration and development. 4. Regain our petroleum and gas rights. We will assert our rights to reclaim Sarawak's constitutional authority to regulate the exploration, prospecting and mining of petroleum and all other mineral resources within the territory of Sarawak by challenging the constitutionality and validity of the Petroleum Development Act 1974. 5. Fair share of MP seats. Reclaim our fair share of MP seats in Federal Parliament and the Federal Constitution, safeguarding Sarawak one-third rights as equal partner in Malaysia. 6. Fair representation of peoples in Sarawak Dun. 1. To safeguard against political manipulation by gerrymandering of Dun seats and for the upholding of true democracy therein, more Dun seats will be allocated for sparsely populated rural areas as well as for those with more voters in the dense urban areas. 2. For a government truly representative of the people and by the people, the Sarawak government must be elected by the majority of Sarawakians no matter how Dun seats are constituted. PSB will not tolerate the current voting system whereby only less than 20% of voters are needed to elect a government. 7. Fair political and governmental structure. 1. Eradicate and avoid corruption, the manipulation and abuse of political power and the lack of accountability under the current political structure. The Sarawak Constitution shall be amended to include the provision of 1 Chief Minister, 4 Deputy Chief Ministers. The appointment of full Cabinet Ministers by the Chief Minister shall be by consultation with all the Deputy Chief Ministers and at least by a majority decision of the Chief Minister and the 4 Deputy Chief Ministers combined. Have each of the main ethnic groups, Dayaks, Malays, Melanau, Chinese, and a cluster of few minority native groups in Sarawak shall be entitled to at least one position of either the Chief Ministership or Deputy Chief Ministership, regardless of political background or position. 2. Each ethnic group or a cluster shall have at least one minister or deputy or assistant minister appointed or identified to represent them in the cabinet. To avoid cronyism and ensure transparency and fair representation of government, cabinet and public sectors and government authorities or bodies will be fairly and equally represented meritoriously not only by ethnic backgrounds but also by different regions or areas across Sarawak. 3. The Sarawak State Treasury shall be directly under the Cabinet and sits outside and apart from the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Ministers who shall not hold any state finance ministerial office or positions. 4. We will ensure that the composition of the civil service and statutory bodies is a true reflection of the diverse racial mix in Sarawak as far as possible. As a start, we will revoke the delegation of power from the Public Services Commission to the Chief Minister, making it truly independent. We will take steps to make sure that the PSC is truly a multiracial body. Without compromising the principle of meritocracy, not less than 20% of government servant positions shall be reserved for each of the categorized ethnic group to encourage diversity and participation with fair and equitable distribution at each level of seniority. 5. As a first step, 50% of councillors in the municipal and rural councils are to be elected by the respective residents. 8. Constitutional protection. 1. Rights under MA63. To prevent manipulation, PSB advocates to incorporate provisions in the Sarawak Constitution requiring unanimous consent of all Dun members for any amendment in order to protect our autonomy, our rights under MA 63, and for a fair and transparent government, our citizenship, the freedom of religious and cultural practices, good education and equal opportunities for all. 2. Autonomous and independent rights. PSB will also advocate for the Constitution to include the provision for the referendum of the peoples to decide on the future integrity and the inherited autonomous and independent rights of Sarawak. Education reform. The foundation of a strong and progressive nation depends on the proficiency of its education system. To address and arrest the poor quality and falling standard of education in Malaysia and equally so in Sarawak, PSB undertakes that its government will carry out rightful education reforms without delay or hesitation. 1. Reform in scholarships. Providing scholarships to all eligible Sarawakian students for their education fees at recognised universities. 2. Reform in education management autonomy. Adopting autonomy in the management of Sarawakian education and ensuring that all Ministry of Education (MOE) directives, policies and implementation are consistent with the needs and aspirations of Sarawakian students, with the objective of improving our education standard to be on par with international levels. 3. Reform in funding of education. The salaries and wages of all staff, teaching and non-teaching of unaided and vernacular schools, including existing independent Chinese schools, mission schools, lodge schools and kindergartens, to be fully funded by the federal or the Sarawak government under PSB. 4. Encourage multilingualism and guaranteed in the Sarawak Constitution. All students will be encouraged to learn and subsequently achieve proficiency in a second language of their choice from among English, Chinese, Iban, or other vernacular languages within a set timeline. English as a teaching medium will be guaranteed as a choice in all schools by stakeholders. 5. To repair and upgrade schools. PSB in government will immediately allocate 1 billion ringgit to repair all dilapidated and rundown schools. We will allocate another 1 billion ringgit to upgrade all schools, including computers and advanced learning equipment and internet connection to facilitate e-learning. 6. Provision of decent boarding hostels. Immediately launching initiatives to achieve within 5 years the provision of adequate boarding hostels for students to stay and continue their studies in outstation secondary schools. 7. Enhance teachers' role and opportunities. All teachers from all types of schools comprising of national vernacular, including current Chinese independent schools, mission schools, kindergartens and qualified children's nurseries, will enjoy fair and equal pay and opportunities in career development based on qualifications and meritocracy. We will provide incentives and special efforts to encourage more Sarawakians to take up teaching and become inspirational mentors for our young generation. The aim is to reduce dependence on teachers from West Malaysia. 8. Mother tongue education. We will allocate a special budget to provide mother tongue education for each ethnic group at preschool until primary school level to encourage the preservation of our ethnic languages, customs and culture. 9. To improve local tertiary education. Inviting industries and academic entities, both at local and international levels, to draw up a master plan with recommendations to uplift effectiveness of university programs, focus on R&D, and set up science and development agencies. Socio-economy reform. 1. Increase state revenue. Strategically solidify Sarawak's state revenue, including establishing a sovereign wealth fund by increasing the state government reserve to 100 billion ringgit through sound financial planning and management, increasing revenue from oil and gas and seashore income, as well as through pragmatic diversification of economic activities. 2. Economic priorities. To ensure sustainable economic progress, PSB government will put on hold and carry out public review on all lavish, mega and impulsive walkabout projects amounting to 45 billion ringgit under Abang Johari's GPS government. Redirect financial resources to uplift poverty and improve the living standard of peoples in Sarawak with better housing, more employment and economic opportunities, decent meals, good quality education with proper schools and with provision of basic infrastructure like proper roads and bridges, health and medical care, necessary facilities for inland river transportation, electricity and water and internet connection. 3. Economic liberalisation. To motivate economic progress, PSB government will commit to economic liberalisation, eradicate monopoly, practice of transparency to combat corruption, eradicate monopoly or subject to public scrutiny to improve competitiveness, including issuing of sand extraction licenses or permit, especially along Rajang and Igan rivers directly to operators and users, allowing more companies to participate in the supply, manufacturing and sale of cement and related products, provide favourable policies for a stable and conducive environment for the private sector to do business to lead in creating decent employment for all Sarawakians, undertake not to impose huge tax increase arbitrarily and arrogantly, or impose export ban or politically withhold permits or licenses, do away with all sales tax on all forms of tyres to reduce transportation and travelling costs, renew all quarrying licenses if operators complied with license conditions. 4. Fishermen and smallholder land farmers. To harness the rich resources in seas, rivers and vast land, PSB government will allocate 500 million ringgit for coastal and river inhabitants to generate higher income from fishing and designated marine fishing activities. Allocate 500 million ringgit for developing designated land farming activities, fruits, vegetables or other food crops to generate higher income and more jobs for the farmers in rural areas. Special Assistance Fund. Grant all registered and active fishermen and farmers a monthly assistance allowance of 1,200 ringgit or 2,200 ringgit per household affected by poor weather, example monsoon season, or due to natural disasters. 5. Special provision for designated SMEs. For SMEs to play greater roles in economic contribution, designated industries and businesses for all types of SMEs to enjoy special concessions on electricity tariffs, land rents and premiums. 6. Development reform. 1. Inland tenure and ownership. To give Sarawakians security of land ownership, we will convert all leasehold residential land to freehold and all commercial land to 99-year leases in return for the payment of a one-off premium to the state based on the value of the property and enjoy automatic renewal unless required by the government for public use. All leased land for agriculture, including food production, will be granted 99-year leases and enjoy automatic renewal unless required by government for public uses. All land producing commercial food crops will be exempted from land rent or any other land-related taxes or levies. Establishment of Land Commission to improve land administration including Pemakai Menua and Pulau Galau. All established NCR land shall be issued with titles in perpetuity under Section 18 of the Land Code. Communal native customary land issued under Section 6 of the Land Code may be developed with the agreement of at least 70% of the members of the community concerned. We promise that all Section 47 notices will automatically lapse 2 years after being gazetted if not taken up by the government for public purposes. 2. Inland development. Replace natural forests. Continue efforts to preserve natural forests by establishment of 1 million hectares planted forest through resolving land issues with local inhabitants and provide 5 billion ringgit investment fund for the rural natives to plant and own their tree plantation estate. 20,000 ringgit per hectare of NCR land. Grant 20,000 ringgit per hectare to enable about 1 million hectares of NCR landowners, either individually or communally, to establish and own their agriculture plantations, example oil palm, timber trees, rubber, bamboo, sago, durian and fruits of various kinds. 1 billion ringgit for rural cooperatives. Grant a sum of 1 billion ringgit to set up rural cooperatives to facilitate the achievement of economies of scale in sales and marketing and logistics through training and capacity building for the rural population. 3. In infrastructure and basic utilities. All-weather roads. Prioritize to immediately connect all major rural households, schools and their agricultural properties with all-weather roads. Short and long-term infrastructure provisions. Immediately carry out short-term provisions of electricity, water and internet connection to all rural schools, longhouses and kampong community centres. Concurrently, study and carry out long-term 10-year plan to achieve provisions of these basic needs on permanent basis. Rural healthcare centres. To upgrade or build more clinics or community neighbourhood hospitals including DESA clinics, reinforced with sufficient manpower and medical supplies. Upgrade roads from R3 to R5 uses. Immediately allow vehicles on all essential roads to enjoy R5 standards and abolish and/or reduce sales tax or other taxes, for example tyres, in order to reduce transport and delivery costs for essential goods to and from rural areas, as well as for strategic economic activities of the private sectors. In housing initiatives, housing assistance and grant of titles. For the vast majority of poor Dayaks, Orang Ulu and rural natives, grant a sum of 50,000 ringgit per pintu for the construction of new longhouses and 20,000 ringgit per pintu for repair or upgrading of existing longhouses. For the vast majority of poor Malay Melanau living in substandard houses in kampongs and coastal region, grant a sum of 50,000 ringgit per household for the construction of new house and 20,000 ringgit for repair and upgrading of each house. In the case of rural peoples practicing communal living, allocation of 500 million ringgit to uplift their living conditions and reserves territories for their living gatherings. For the fair and equal spirit of Fairland Sarawak, All Sarawakians, including the Chinese in poor standing, can either choose to enjoy the same grant of 50,000 ringgit new house or 20,000 ringgit existing house or other home ownership benefits, moving beyond low-cost or affordable spectra houses. Instead of building low-cost affordable houses which will widen social gaps between the haves and the have-nots, PSB will not only provide assistance to home buyers but also encourage housing developers to combine resources so that each housing estate or suburb will be provided with schools, medical facilities, neighborhood shopping centers, open space playgrounds, community halls, sports and religious facilities as part of a complete master plan development. These qualified residential housing developers will be granted with greater plot ratios and densities, as well as exemption from related duties, levies, taxes, and reduced land premium and other necessary incentives on rebate basis. The PSB government will partner with qualified housing developers to increase the supply of residential accommodation under guided market factoring. For first home buyers, grant a 10-year full exemption on land rents, assessment and other rates, as well as free electricity and water connection for all qualified first-time home buyers and first-time homeowners whose monthly household income is less than 10,000 ringgit as qualified. The PSB government will also co-finance on 50-50 basis for qualified first-time home buyers for up to 30 years loan amount not exceeding 200,000 ringgit each, with no interest and suspended repayments within the first 5 years. For first homeowners, all qualified first homeowners with income less than 5,000 ringgit per month shall be entitled to a bridging loan for their monthly installment payments with no interest and no repayment for the next 5 years of the remaining amount. 5. In social initiatives, introduce employment incentives. To encourage the employment of Sarawakians during and after COVID-19 pandemic period, employers will be entitled to an incentive of 6,000 ringgit per year for every Sarawakian employed in Sarawak having monthly salary or wages in aggregate of not exceeding 3,000 ringgit per month for a period of 5 years and reviewed thereafter. Introduce children endowment. To encourage Sarawakians to reside and raise families in Sarawak, each family will be entitled to 200 ringgit per month childcare assistance for each child below 3 years old, 300 ringgit per month for each child between 3 to 5 years old, and 500 ringgit per month for each child above 5 years but below 18 years old. This childcare assistance shall be raised based on CPI. Special Economic Zones. To establish Special Economic Zones (SEZ) in southern, central and northern regions with multiple incentives including free electricity and water connections to those SEZ. Medical welfare insurance. An insurance scheme for all Sarawakians with 50% subsidy of medical premium by the Sarawak government under PSB to protect against major sickness expenses in public and private hospitals or clinics. Relocation assistance. The provision of 100,000 ringgit each as a relocation assistance to those approved Sarawakians with special skill or qualification, especially in science, medical and engineering, digital economy research fields, and other types of professions to return and work in Sarawak for a period of not less than 5 years. Abolish or reduce road taxes. To abolish or reduce road tax for providing transportation of good and service to and from rural areas. Special care for the elderly and the handicapped. Provide financial resources for NGOs and private sectors taking up caregiving for the elderly, the handicapped and the low-income population regardless of race, religion, social status and whether they are living in urban or rural areas. All qualified senior citizens with disability and handicapped Sarawakians requiring special care will be provided with caretaking allowance of 1,200 ringgit per month. To encourage independence and self-respect, qualified senior citizens to be granted 600 ringgit per month of living allowance and accorded with special status to enjoy discount privileges and assistance in their daily living. We recognize that women's rights are human rights, and we will protect and enforce the rights of women, including the right to live free from violence, slavery and discrimination, to be educated, to own property, to vote and to earn a fair and equal wage. We will set up women's aid centers and safe houses for women in abusive relationships. We will establish training programs and microcredit facilities for single mothers and women who wish to set up their own businesses. We will promote gender equality in all aspects and conduct public awareness campaigns on sexual harassment in the workplace and educational institutions. We promise to provide choices for our youth in education and training, including vocational and trades training and the arts. We promise to provide retraining opportunities for youths who wish to move on to different jobs or to improve themselves. We pledge to establish entrepreneurial programs and financing for youths who have good business plans. We will provide more sports facilities and programs for our youth to encourage more active lifestyles. Every Sarawakian aged between 18 years old and 23 years old will be given a sum of 10,000 ringgit assisting their job startup. Corruption, MRP and RTP. The PSB government will stamp out corruption with fair play and transparency. All constituencies will be entitled to MRP and RTP programs regardless of the inclination of the political beliefs, and all major projects awards are subject to and open for public consultation and scrutiny. All appointed community leaders will only work for government for all peoples and not political parties for some. Media institutions. All public and private media institutions are mandated by DUN to act independently and guarantee the rights to free but fair and responsible reporting on the affairs of the government. Sarawak citizenship protection. The PSB government will protect the integrity of Sarawakian citizenship by amending and making clearer and stricter conditions or definition. In addition, the control and administration of citizenship registration shall be revested back to the Sarawak government subject to public audit. Recognition of children of mixed marriages. To recognize children of mixed marriages between natives and non-natives as natives and be accorded the appropriate rights. Cultures and traditions. The PSB government will establish a ministry to preserve and enhance the traditions and cultural activities of each and every respective ethnic groups in Sarawak, including historical artifacts, languages and arts and music, among others. Religion. 1. Guaranteed freedom of religion and freedom of association. In recognition of Sarawak as a multi-racial, multi-religious and multicultural society, PSB will ensure that there is absolute freedom and respect of choice of religion and is practiced without fear of persecution or discrimination guaranteed by the state constitution. In addition, no one shall be allowed to use religion as a means to propagate politics. 2. Multi-Religion Harmony Commission. PSB will establish a special Multi-Religion Harmony Commission comprised of representatives from each of the recognised religious groups in Sarawak and state government members to oversee and ensure the freedom of religion is truly practiced in Sarawak, and whose mandate shall be to determine the appropriate public programs and funding pertaining to religion in the state. 3. Uniform and fair funding for all recognised religions. PSB will ensure that public funding is sufficiently available and fairly allocated to all the recognised religions in the state, with the objective of supporting all religions without preference, bias or discrimination. Such funding will include funding programs for places of worship, religious institutes and associations, religious education and courses, as well as religious events and festivals. In this regard, the Multi-Religion Harmony Commission will develop and administer funding policy and prerogatives. All such funding will be subject to independent inquiry and public audit to ensure fair and effective distribution of funds. 4. Clear demarcation of Sharia and civil legal systems. PSB will work toward clear demarcation of jurisdiction between the Sharia legal system and civil law system, but without compromising any of the rights of all Sarawakians under the federal and state constitutions. Sarawak as the model secular state. PSB will make Sarawak a model secular state while ensuring that all religions, ethnicities and cultures will be fairly and uniformly treated and are respected without segregation or discrimination. PSB will, through written laws, to ensure that the Sarawak government and political parties or any person must not make use of religion and ethnicity to push any agenda, garner and exert any political influence, determine government policy, and promulgate discrimination or marginalization of its people. To safeguard the above principles for the free practice of religion in Sarawak, it is proposed that any further proposed amendments on this subject matter may only be done with 90% majority support of the Dewan Undangan Negeri or via state referendum. Our vows and commitments. If elected to form the next Sarawak government, PSB will vow and commit to the people of Sarawak to carry out vigorously all the reforms we advocate and correct the failures and wrongdoings of the GPS XBN in government over the last 58 years. Many more. The PSB government manifesto agreement and commitments are just a part of the overall many changes needed to make and move Sarawak towards an advanced nation. If elected to form the next government, PSB promises and undertakes to do everything it can to govern Sarawak toward a brighter future, with fairness and transparency for all Sarawakians. It is time to change the GPS aka XBN government, which has been given more than 50 years to govern Sarawak. GPS had failed not only to protect Sarawak, but had instead surrendered its rights under MA 63. Sarawak is still a poor state after 58 years due to GPS aka XBN poor governance and unkept promises since the formation of Malaysia in 1963. Besides losing ownership of our oil, gas resources, as well as Sarawak's sea territories among other things, the GPS government even proceeded to amend our Sarawak constitution to facilitate more non-Sarawakians to be eligible to become Sarawakians. The time to change the GPS government is now. Let PSB be the change to improve our lives and bring hope to the future of our children. The end is here for GPS. The hope of the future is here. The rising sun in Sarawak. Parti Sarawak Bersatu.